Welcome to CEO's Library, the 1% Bookshelf. I'm your host, and today we're diving into a book that could revolutionize the way you connect with others. Have you ever wondered why some people seem to have a magical ability to connect with anyone, anywhere? Why certain leaders can inspire entire organizations with just a few words? Or why some of your conversations leave you feeling energized and understood, while others fall flat? Today we're exploring these questions through the lens of Charles Duhigg's groundbreaking book, Supercommunicators: How to Unlock the Secret Language of Connection. But before we dive in, let me ask you this. When was the last time you felt truly heard and understood in a conversation? Hold on to that feeling, because by the end of this episode, you'll have the tools to create more of those moments, both in your personal and professional life. Let's start with a story that Duhigg shares in the book. Imagine you're a CIA recruiter tasked with convincing a foreign official to betray their country and become a spy for the United States. How would you approach that conversation? What would you say? This was the challenge facing Jim Lawler, a CIA officer who found himself struggling to recruit assets early in his career. Despite his training and expertise, Lawler couldn't seem to make meaningful connections with potential recruits. That is, until he had a breakthrough moment with a young woman named Yasmin. Lawler had been trying to recruit Yasmin for weeks, using all the techniques he'd been taught. He presented facts, made logical arguments, and even offered financial incentives. But nothing worked. Yasmin remained resistant and afraid. Then, during what Lawler thought would be their final meeting, something changed. Instead of trying to persuade Yasmin, Lawler opened up about his own fears and insecurities. He shared how he sometimes felt inadequate in his role, how he worried about failing. To his surprise, Yasmin began to open up in return. She shared her own fears and aspirations. And by the end of that conversation, Yasmin agreed to become an asset for the CIA. What changed? According to Duhigg, Lawler had stumbled upon one of the key principles of supercommunication, the power of vulnerability and emotional connection. This story illustrates a fundamental truth that Duhigg explores throughout the book. True connection isn't about presenting perfect arguments or projecting an image of flawless competence. It's about creating a space where both parties feel safe to be authentic and vulnerable. Now, you might be thinking, that's all well and good for spies, but how does this apply to my life? Well, let's break it down. Duhigg argues that all meaningful conversations fall into one of three categories. First, what's this really about conversations? Second, how do we feel conversations? And third, who are we conversations? Understanding which type of conversation you're in is crucial for effective communication. Let's explore each one. What's this really about conversations are focused on practical matters and decision-making. These are the conversations where you're trying to solve a problem or make a choice. In the business world, this might be a strategy meeting or a negotiation. How do we feel conversations are all about emotions. These are the conversations where you're sharing personal experiences, expressing concerns, or offering support. Who are we conversations deal with identity and social roles. These are the conversations where you're defining your relationship with others, or exploring your place in a group or organization. The key to being a supercommunicator, Duhigg argues, is recognizing which type of conversation you're in and adapting your approach accordingly. But here's the catch. Most of us are terrible at this. We often try to have a "what's this really about" conversation, when what's really needed is a "how do we feel" conversation. Think about a time when you tried to offer practical solutions to a friend who was venting about a problem. How did that go? Chances are, it didn't go well. Your friend wasn't looking for solutions. They were looking for emotional support. By misreading the conversation type, you missed an opportunity for deeper connection. So, how can we become better at recognizing and navigating these different types of conversations? Duhigg offers several strategies, but let's focus on one powerful technique: asking deep questions. Deep questions are those that invite people to share their beliefs, values, and experiences. They go beyond surface-level small talk and create opportunities for real connection. For example, instead of asking, "How was your weekend?" you might ask, "What was the most meaningful part of your weekend?" Here's a challenge for you. In your next conversation, try asking at least one deep question. You might be surprised at how quickly it changes the dynamic of the interaction. let's dive deeper into the 3 types of conversations Duhigg identifies and explore how we can approach each one for maximum impact. First, what's this really about conversations? These are practical, decision-making conversations focused on solving problems or making choices. In business, this might be a strategy meeting, a negotiation, or a project planning session. How to approach. Start by clearly stating the purpose of the conversation. Use data and logical arguments to support your points. Ask clarifying questions to ensure everyone understands the issue at hand. Focus on actionable outcomes and next steps. Summarize decisions and action items at the end of the conversation. For example, in a strategy meeting, you might say, "Today, we need to decide on our Q4 marketing budget. Let's review our current performance data and discuss how we can allocate resources most effectively." Second, how do we feel conversations? These conversations are centered on emotions, personal experiences, and building empathy. They're crucial for team building, conflict resolution, and providing support. How to approach. Create a safe space by showing empathy and vulnerability. Use active listening techniques, such as paraphrasing what you've heard. Ask open-ended questions about emotions and experiences. Avoid jumping to solutions unless explicitly asked for advice. Validate feelings and experiences, even if you don't agree with them. For instance, if a team member is expressing frustration about a project, you might say, "It sounds like you're feeling overwhelmed by the workload. Can you tell me more about what's been most challenging for you?" Third, who are we conversations? These conversations deal with identity, values, and social roles. They're important for defining company culture, building team cohesion, and navigating organizational changes. How to approach. Start by acknowledging the importance of shared values and identity. Encourage people to share personal stories that illustrate their values. Look for common ground and shared experiences. Be open to diverse perspectives and experiences. Frame challenges in terms of collective identity and shared goals. For example, during a company retreat, you might initiate a conversation by saying, "Let's talk about what drew each of us to this company and what values we believe are most important to our work." Now, here's where it gets tricky. Many communication breakdowns happen when we approach one type of conversation as if it were another. Imagine you're having a "how do we feel" conversation with a colleague who's stressed about a project, but you keep trying to turn it into a "what's this really about" conversation by offering solutions. You might think you're being helpful, but you're actually missing an opportunity for emotional connection. The key is to be flexible and attentive. Pay close attention to verbal and nonverbal cues to understand what type of conversation is needed at any given moment. Sometimes you might need to shift gears mid-conversation. For instance, "what's this really about" strategy discussion might reveal underlying anxieties that require a shift to a "how do we feel" conversation. Duhigg argues that supercommunicators excel at recognizing these different conversation types and seamlessly adapting their approach. They know when to present data, when to offer emotional support, and when to invoke shared values and identity. So, here's a challenge for you. In your next few interactions, try to consciously identify which type of conversation you're in. Are you aligned with the other person on the conversation type? If not, how might you adjust your approach to create better alignment and deeper connection? Remember, becoming adept at navigating these different conversation types takes practice. But with time and attention, you can dramatically improve your ability to connect with others in any situation. Now, let's shift gears and talk about another key insight from the book: the power of emotional contagion. Have you ever noticed how you tend to mirror the emotions of those around you? If someone is excited, you get excited. If they're anxious, you start to feel anxious too. This phenomenon, known as emotional contagion, is a powerful tool in the Supercommunicators' arsenal. By consciously managing our own emotions and attuning ourselves to the emotions of others, we can create a more positive and productive communication environment. Duhigg shares a fascinating example of this principle in action. He describes a study where researchers looked at the communication patterns of NBA teams during timeouts. They found that teams whose players and coaches displayed more positive emotions during these breaks were more likely to outperform their opponents in the following minutes of play. The lesson here? Your emotional state isn't just a personal matter. It's a crucial factor in your ability to communicate effectively and influence others. So, here's another challenge for you. Before your next important meeting or conversation, take a moment to check in with your emotional state. Are you bringing the energy and emotions that will foster the kind of connection you want to create? As we wrap up, let's return to the story of Jim Lawler, the CIA recruiter. His breakthrough with Yasmin came when he stopped trying to be the perfect all-knowing agent and instead showed his human side. He created a "how do we feel" conversation in a situation where most would have stuck to a "what's this really about" approach. The lesson here is clear. Sometimes the most powerful thing we can do in a conversation is to drop our facades and connect on a human level. It's not always about having the right answers or being the smartest person in the room. Often it's about creating a space where real, authentic communication can happen. So, as you go about your day, I challenge you to look for opportunities to apply these principles. Ask deeper questions. Pay attention to the emotional undercurrents in your conversations. And don't be afraid to show your own vulnerability when the situation calls for it. Remember, becoming a super communicator isn't about mastering a set of tricks or techniques. It's about developing a deeper understanding of human connection and practicing these skills consistently. With time and practice, you too can unlock the secret language of connection that Duhigg describes in his book. That's all for today's episode of CEO's Library, the 1% Bookshelf. If you found value in these insights from Charles Duhigg's Supercommunicators, I encourage you to pick up the book and dive deeper. You can find the Amazon link to the book in the description of this podcast episode. And remember, the next time you're in a conversation, ask yourself, what's this really about? How do we feel? Who are we? The answers to these questions could be the key to unlocking your own super communication powers. Until next time, keep reading, keep learning, and keep connecting.